Hey friends, Kevin here from KF Music Studio, and I want to do something a little different today. I want to tell you a little bit about my history, with music, and what I would do differently now that I'm 36 and I've been a musician now for over 20 years. What would I do differently if I could go back and tell 16-year-old me who was just playing bass in his bedroom at home, if I could go back and talk to that person, that 16-year-old me 20 years ago, and say, hey, you're going to have a lifelong career in music, and I want to set you up for success. This is what I would tell you. And I wrote down a list. I got 6 things that I would do differently if I had to go back and learn music again. Now, for a little context, I went to school for music. I studied music. I was a music and business major. And so I studied music theory, music history, aural skills. I was in bands, orchestras. I played guitar, pretty much feels like I've done it all. And if I could go back and tell me, this is what I would do differently. All right. So in no particular order, but these are the 6 things that I would do differently if I could go back and learn music again to make it a little bit more efficient for me. So number 1 is I would invest in a good, solid starting instrument. Now, I've taught guitar lessons for years, and I can tell you that there's a sweet spot to your first instrument. Now, I've always heard it said like your first instrument is kind of like your first car, right? Like it needs to be reliable. It needs to be something that's of somewhat quality, but it's not going to be the top of the line instrument. Now, there's always outliers in this case, but if you're on this video and you're like, hey, I really want to get started playing the guitar, but man, I don't want to spend $1,000 on that. That's okay. You don't need to spend $8,000-$9,000. You don't need to go to the highest end instrument. In fact, if I could go back and tell me, I played on a $100 bass for probably 12, 15 years. And I never took the time to invest on getting a better instrument. So the instrument actually held me back when I would play certain gigs, or if I would go to certain events and I would go to play, my bass couldn't do what I needed it to do. My guitar couldn't do what I needed it to do. I remember my first acoustic guitar I bought, it was about $300, and it was really cool because it actually had a 1/4 inch out and an XLR out, which I thought at the time, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I don't need to get a direct DI box. I can just plug right into the board. Well, that guitar was horribly unreliable. So I would play gigs where my guitar would cut in and out, and I would take it to the shop and they'd give it back to me. They would say it was fixed, and it wasn't fixed. And the reality is I had outgrown that instrument. It was great to learn on. It was great for sort of the entry level, get my feet wet, learn about the instrument. But I think that if I could go back and tell myself anything, mostly in college, I would have looked at the instrument I had and said, hey, this is a place that I think you could actually upgrade. Now, I'm a firm believer that when it comes to instruments, that you tend to have 3 tiers of instruments. Like you have your first beginning instrument. Depending on the instrument, bass or guitar, that's usually between $100 to $200 instrument. Like it doesn't need to be the highest quality, but I would stick with a quality brand. So do some research, see which ones are highly reviewed, and go with those. But at a certain point, after a year or a year and a half of learning on that instrument, you're going to need something a little bit better. You're going to need to get something a little bit more elevated so that it can grow with you. So it has a little bit more features, it's more reliable, and that's definitely something. That's number 1. If I could go back and tell 16-year-old me anything, it would be upgrade your equipment when appropriate. The second thing I would do if I could go back and learn music again is I would develop good practice habits. Now, this is both in developing a love for just spending time with my instrument and having an idea of sequentially what I would practice. So when I was a musician in college, I had that really in my lessons. I had phenomenal teachers that taught me great things, but I didn't develop the habit of systemic good sequential practicing that would say, hey, this is where I want to be 3 months from now. So these are the steps I need to do to get there. So I was just, oh, I'm learning this piece of music. Cool. I'm just going to learn that piece of music. Well, but over time, what happened was you don't develop the technical ability to be able to translate like the Segovia 6 scales, for example, on acoustic guitar. Like not knowing those like the back of my hand meant that when I saw them in a piece of music, it was much harder to learn it because I didn't have that foundational knowledge. So if I could go back, I would definitely develop systemic and sequential good practicing habits. Number 3 is I would spend more time focused on transcribing. So I used to always say that there are basically 2 types of musicians, that there are those who read and those who have great ears. And over time, I've learned that that's not entirely the case, though I tend to be a really great reader. If you put a piece of music in front of me, I can read it. I can read it down. No problem. But if you were to give me that same song and say, hey, I don't have any music written out for this, can you just listen to it and learn it? I could do okay, but I wasn't very strong at that. And I realized it's because I never spent the time as a beginning musician, as a college student. I didn't spend the time transcribing the music. Now, it's harder at first to do that. It's harder to take a piece of music and say, you're going to have to just learn it by ear. And especially in the guitar world where there's so many websites that have great guitar tabs, it's so easy to pull up a tab and learn it, read it, great. But you're sort of missing that foundational piece of a very live situation that I've had where I've played a gig and they say, hey, we're going to learn this song. So can you learn this song? And I have to listen to it and develop it. And I'm okay at it, but I could have been and can be much better if I had just spent the time learning to transcribe. So my 4th thing that I would do differently is I would identify the goals that I have and work towards them. So what do I mean by this? This kind of goes hand in hand with the practicing, but for me, it was always, as I look back on my time as a musician, I realized that a lot of my practicing was very unfocused. So that meant that I was practicing things, but they were scattered concepts and they didn't really build on each other. And so a lot of times I found myself trying to learn some complex things, complex concepts, but I hadn't spent the time really learning the basics to lead up to that. So I was trying to do a level 7 or 8 difficulty without really having the foundation of 3 and 4. And so that left me feeling frustrated, and then I felt unconfident because I wasn't able to do the things that I felt like somebody who has been playing for as long as I have should be able to do. So I think that if I could go back, and ironically, this is something actually I'm doing today moving forward, and there's a whole video on that at some point. But if I could go back, I would say I would just identify what do I want to learn and then spend the time developing a system or finding resources or finding a good coach, finding a good teacher, going through those steps and making sure that I could meet the goals that I wanted to do. And I think along with that, my number 5, if I could go back and tell myself anything, would be to get a solid foundation of technical skills. So when I think back on my time in college, when I was learning classical guitar and playing bass, and I realized that I didn't spend enough time learning the technical aspect of playing the instrument. Now, you can get by with poor technique for a while. You can get by with that. So if you're somebody who plays a lot of acoustic chords, if you maybe don't fret every note, if maybe some of the notes don't come out, or a note or two doesn't come out, or you lift your hand for a second and you get a little buzzing sound and it's not super clean, you can get by with that for a while. But learning the technical aspect of your instrument, that means scales, that means triads, that means arpeggios, that means learning all those technical skills that are not so much fun to play, but understanding that knowing those technical things means that when you play something more complicated, or when you're taking a gig, you can walk in with a confidence and say, yeah, I've got this. Like I know everything I need to know, and there's a certain level of confidence. And as somebody who has struggled with solo stage fright in my life, like I look back and say, well, the reason for that is I didn't give myself a foundation. I didn't give myself the technical foundation of my instruments. So when I was put in a high pressure situation, you fall back to your technique, you fall back to your training, you revert back to what you know. And I didn't have that. I didn't have that solid foundation. So I struggled. And if I could go back, that's definitely what I would do. And the last piece, the last thing I would tell 16-year-old me as I'm getting into music would be to listen to music more, but to listen more critically and to listen to great players in my field. So, for example, like I think as a guitar player, I always loved, that was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. So, some people, artists like John Mayer and phenomenal people who played great acoustic kind of singer-songwriter styles. That I would listen to them, but I didn't listen to them critically and think through like, oh wow, like he's using this scale, but he's modifying it, or using this triad structure on the guitar, or this shell voicing. And by knowing those things, by listening to great players, you develop your ear, you develop your style, and also you learn, you sort of absorb more of the music than if you just read a sheet of music and played it. So we talk about this a lot in like the jazz forums. Like if you're a great jazz player, the best way to learn jazz is just to listen to it, to study it, to be absorbed in it, and just understand the style. Because you pick up on things like feel and like those stylistic parts of playing those styles. You learn that from just listening to great players. So as you're developing your tone and you're developing what you like on your instruments or what you like as a musician, this is the best way to do that, is to listen to great players. So going back through that list, I would invest in a good, solid beginning instrument, and then also understanding my 3 tiers, my beginning instrument, my intermediate instrument, which is like I've been learning for a year, I need something a little bit better, and then my professional instrument, which is like, okay, I know exactly what I need this instrument to do. So, and you can have more than one professional instrument, but you have those instruments so that way, if I'm playing a worship gig, I know what instrument I'm going to take. Or if I'm playing a country gig, I know what instrument I'm going to take. So my 6 things I do differently: I would invest in a solid beginning instrument, develop good practice habits, focus on transcribing, identify my goals and focus on working towards them sequentially, get a solid foundation on technical skills, and then also just listen to great players. So I hope that's helpful. I hope for wherever you are on your musician journey, I hope that one of those ideas, one of those concepts will help take your music playing to the next level. And so go ahead and like this video, send it to a friend, subscribe here. I want to keep making content that I hope is helpful for you, because I want you to experience music in the way that I have. It's been the best thing in my life. So, and I have a free guide at kfmusicstudio.com. We have the 9 building blocks to music theory. That guide is there on the website. It's my free gift to you. So if you're an absolute beginner, or if you've tried everything and you just feel like it's not working, try this guide, because I know if you work through it and understand it, it's going to be an awesome thing for you. So thank you so much. Thanks for getting the word out about this video. And I hope one of these ideas has helped you. Leave a comment below and let me know which one you resonate with the most. Love you, friends. Have a wonderful day.